Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Anna today. Anna's an individual who's a listener of the show, and she reached out to me through email about some very interesting experiences from back in the, I believe, 1970s in Zandt County, Texas. So welcome to the show today, Anna. How's it going?
Well, first, I'm going to correct you. It was the 1960s.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Thank you. How are things down where you're at today?
Pleasant. I'm actually about 90 minutes from where this took place, and I can tell you civilization has taken over.
We were talking before the interview, and it sounds like it's a whole different world down there where we'll be talking about today. But you know, Anna, I'm going to go ahead and pass things right over to you. Feel free to take us back to the 60s, to when this all started to happen for you, and we'll be listening.
Okay. Well, I will tell your viewers, or excuse me, listeners and viewers, that I had to keep myself notes, or I will be telling you what took place in August before June. This has to keep me in chronological order, so you'll probably hear paper rustling from time to time. This began taking place in June 1966 when I was 12 years old. Back then, every second Sunday of the month for several years, my family visited some of my dad's relatives in what was back then the deep woods of Zandt County, Texas. My dad had grown up just a short walk from their house, so they were very close emotionally. This included my Uncle Jess, his wife Aunt Johnny, their adult son Louis, whose wife was Lenny, and their 4 children that ranged in ages from 3 to 12 back then. Like it was common in that part of Texas, 3 generations lived in the same house. They didn't have indoor plumbing, but they did have electricity. And they were absolutely the first people in their community to have electricity. That's how rural it was. My great uncle had to pay to have these huge structures brought through the county so that he could have electricity in his house, and it ended up providing electricity for his neighbors as well. In June, we made an exception to our regular visiting schedule. Instead of going on a Sunday, we went on the second Saturday and do what our parents called trading kids. I would stay with the family while Lewis's eldest son, Pete, went to visit with my brothers for a week. Louis' eldest daughter, Judy, was a year younger than me, and we were both 2 great nature lovers, which is why we loved to explore the woods together. Although Louis had another daughter, she preferred to do things alone since she was an introvert, and their youngest son, well, he was only 3, so he was always with his mama. Shortly after we arrived, Judy excitedly rushed up to me. "I've got a surprise for you," she exclaimed as she led me into the woods. After about a 30-minute walk, we came upon a large meadow in the middle of the woods. It was 10 acres large, and that late spring day, it was covered with beautiful flowers. We sat down on a fallen tree to take in its beauty. Insects were buzzing around and birds were happily singing. I don't know how long we sat there, mesmerized by its beauty, when suddenly it got quiet, spooky quiet. Judy and I knew it could mean that there was a predator nearby, so we sat there visually scanning the area. Suddenly, the silence was broken by grunting. At first, I thought it was pigs, but it didn't quite sound like pigs. Besides, it wasn't near the ground. Like pigs, it was up in the trees. Amazed, I asked Judy, "What is that?" Dismissively, she answered, "Pigs." I corrected her, "No, listen. It's not pigs. It's up in the trees. And you know pigs can't climb, and there's no such thing as flying pigs." Judy paused and listened with a puzzled look on her face. I asked her how high up in the trees was the grunting. She guessed 20 feet high. I told her that my guess was 20 foot high. Then I asked her, "It doesn't quite sound like pigs either." She agreed. Then there was this strange vocalization. It began with a high E, then went down the musical scale to a note so deep no human could ever duplicate it. "What was that?" I asked Judy. Dismissively, she answered, "Some bird." Astonished, I rebuked her. "Judy, you know that I play the piano, so I know some things about music." She nodded. "If that is a bird, it's bigger than your dad." Then we both felt like something was watching us, not in a threatening way. Even so, it gave us the creeps, and somehow it made us feel chilly. So we rubbed our arms to warm ourselves. Judy looked worried. "I think we need to go home." I agreed. Uncle Jess, who was his grandfather, kept his livestock in 3 different pastures. According to their type, on the east side of their backyard was the goat pasture. It was separated from their backyard by a barbed wire fence. This was the goats' only fence, since my uncle wanted them free to search the woods for tender plants to eat. This gave the woods on his land a more manicured look while feeding his goats, and he didn't have to worry about their safety because they just naturally came back to the pasture when the sun started setting, because they like to spend the evenings sleeping close together. As the sun was, so he never had to worry about losing any of his goats. On the other hand, he couldn't trust his cattle and horses to do that. The cattle pasture was along the south side of their yard and surrounded by wood planks on all 4 sides. The horse pasture faced the front yard, but it was about 500 feet away. Still feeling unnerved by what had happened by the meadow, we needed some comic relief, so we sat on a fallen tree in the goat pasture. Soon we were laughing out loud as we watched their kids play. At noon, Judy's mom, Lenny, opened the back door of the house and announced dinner was ready. In that part of Texas, they called their noontime meal dinner. And at the kitchen, at every meal, the table was covered with large bowls and serving platters full of delicious food. It always felt like a feast. After dinner, I could tell by the look in Judy's eyes that she still felt uncomfortable about what happened by the meadow. So when she suggested that we stay inside for the rest of the day, I agreed. That evening after supper, my parents, my 2 brothers, and Judy's brother Pete left for our home in Dallas suburb for a week-long visit. During the same week, I would be at the home. Had a 1-bedroom home that sat on 4-foot-high tall stilts because the Sabine River was nearby, and they wanted to be prepared in case it ever flooded. Where did all those people sleep? Along the south side of the house was what they called a porch that was the entire length of the house. From 4 feet downward, the walls were covered with shiplap. The next 3 feet upward, metal window screening spanned 3 sides of the porch, except for the door. Above the screening was another foot that was also covered with shiplap. On the outside of the porch was awning that Judy's mother and grandmother had made of heavy cotton canvas. They oiled both sides of the canvas to both waterproof and to prevent mildew. They also sewed canvas straps on the awning. In the warm and hot months, the canvas was rolled up and the straps were tied to screw eyes above the screening. In the cool and cold months, the canvas was unrolled so that it covered the screening and the straps were tied to the screw eyes below the screening. Then a wood-burning stove would be brought into the porch. This made the porch cozy even in the dead of winter. 3 full-size beds, sitting about 4 feet apart, were on the porch. This is where Judy's grandparents, her siblings, and herself slept. And her parents slept in the one bedroom since her dad, Lewis, got up at 4 a.m. to go to his job in Dallas. As soon as it got dark outside, Judy suggested that we get on her bed with the lights off and watch for small animals that would come under the fence. Oh, what a wonderful idea. There was a row of mature oak trees that grew just a few feet from the fence in the cattle pasture. A family of rabbits lived in the burrow under one of the trees. We watched them hop under the fence to graze on the short grass of the yard as we talked softly. Since there was a full moon that night, it was easy to see them. At 9 o'clock, all the lights were turned off and everyone went to bed. It was easy to fall asleep with all that fresh air flowing through the screen. I slept in the middle bed with Judy. Uncle Jess and Aunt Johnny slept in the bed to our left. As it turned out, Uncle Jess slept just 4 feet from me, very protectively. Nothing ever happened. He loved be there to protect his grandkids. Something woke me up. It was in the middle of the night, and everyone was asleep. There, I heard it again. Uncle Jess's 2 collies were under the house, directly under our bed, and they were making that sound dogs make when they are afraid of a larger animal. It's like they're too afraid to growl a lot, but they have to make some kind of sound, so a low mumbled growl comes out. I worried that some predator was in the cattle pasture and wondered if I should wake up Uncle Jess or not. Suddenly, a man jumped up in a break between the trees. The full moon was behind him, so all I could see was a black silhouette of him. I could see him from shoulders upward. He looked straight up, then turned his head to the right and to the left. Once again, he turned his head to the right and to his left, then dropped out of sight. At the same time, the 2 collies rushed out from under the house, and they were wiggling sideways like dogs do when they are happy to see someone they're very fond of. I guess I must have gasped because I heard Uncle Jess say in a loud whisper, "What are you looking at?" So I told him what I just shared with you. "Squatters," he whispered in disgust. "I'm always having trouble with them trying to take my land without paying for it. I'll take care of them in the morning." Then he explained. And I'll interrupt my story to explain this. We do not have leopards in Texas. We have jaguars. And so, but my family didn't know that. They called the jaguar leopard. So I'll probably be calling it a leopard as well. And my uncle went on to say, when I see the leopard during the day, it doesn't mess with me, so I don't mess with him. But if I surprise him in the dark, I would be his next meal. That's why I don't go in the cattle pasture at night. Go back to sleep. That was easy. The next morning, Judy and I awoke to the smell of biscuits in the oven. We quickly got dressed and rushed to the kitchen table. Soon the rest of the family was sitting around the table asking why Uncle Jess was missing. Aunt Johnny explained that he was looking for squatters. After we finished eating, Aunt Johnny ordered Judy and me to sit so we could see through a certain window. Then pointing to the fence post, she said, "Jess will hitch his horse to that fence post when he comes back. As soon as you see him, tell me so I can start his breakfast." While Judy's mother, Lenny, was washing dishes, Aunt Johnny prepared more biscuit dough. She cut it into rounds and placed them on a pan. After that, she got everything else ready so she could be cooking breakfast for Uncle Jess as soon as we saw him. And sure enough, as soon as Judy and I announced that Uncle Jess was back, Aunt Johnny went to work cooking his breakfast. and all the rest of the family gathered around the table to hear his report. We weren't prepared for what we saw. When Uncle Jess opened the door, he looked pale and spooked. He walked to the table and sat down. Still looking spooked, he answered that one of his best breeding cows was missing, and he could not figure out how they took it out of the pasture without waking up Uncle Chalk. I forgot to explain that his brother, Charles, whom we all called Chalk, lived in a tent that he set up right by the cattle gate. The cattle gate made a loud creaking sound anytime you opened it. And the chain, they used a chain to hold it and attach it to a fence post. It was a heavy chain. You could not remove that chain quietly. So how could anyone open that gate without waking up Uncle Chalk, who was just in a canvas tent? Aunt Johnny set his breakfast down on the table in front of him. Before he started eating, he told me to tell them what I'd seen that night. Lewis, who had a job Monday through Friday, was off because that was Sunday morning. He asked his dad if he was going back out to search again. Uncle Jess said yes. Then Lewis told him he wanted to join him. Aunt Johnny piped up, "Be sure to take your long guns and plenty of bullets." She then filled 2 canteens with water and filled 2 lunch sacks with biscuits. When they returned for dinner, they both looked spooked, as they reported that they could not find either a trace of the cow or squatters. Uncle Chalk soon joined us for dinner. Then he joined Uncle Jess and Lewis on horseback as they searched for that missing cow and signs of squatters. But when they returned for supper, they had not found any. They were totally mystified. This just did not make sense. They searched, after they searched around the fence, they searched the path from the gate to the road that led to their house for any sign that someone had come there. They couldn't find any human footprints. They couldn't see any cow footprints. And the land was covered with sand. According to where you dug, it was either 2 to 3 inches deep. So if a cow had walked across that sandy land, it would have left prints. And no man could pick up a 500-pound cow and carry it off. This just didn't make sense. Why was it missing? Oh, well. That evening, we went to bed at 9 o'clock as usual. And something else woke me up. It wasn't the dogs this time. It was wood. Someone was hitting 2 pieces of wood together. And someone else was hitting 2 pieces of wood together. I turned my head and saw that Uncle Jess also heard it. He was sitting on the edge of his bed listening. He pointed and said, "One's in the cattle pasture and one's in the goat pasture. This is how they're communicating." It's probably Morse code. I took Morse code when I was in the Army, but I was never good at it, and I forgot everything I knew when I got out. So now we know there's at least 2 of them. But how did they remove the cow from the pasture? Anyway, we listened for a while, and I finally fell back to sleep listening to the wood knocking. The next day, Uncle Jess goes back out again, and another cow is missing. And this one's just as mysterious. No sign of predators, just like it was before. If it was a coyote, a wolf, or the jaguar, which we called leopard, it would have left blood and pieces of the animal left behind. All 3 animals have that in common, but there wasn't any. It was just like that cow disappeared. And once again, there wasn't any human tracks. Lewis had to have, was already at work, but Uncle Chalk joined Uncle Jess as they searched the land for any sign that a human being had been near that cattle pasture. It just did not make sense. How could they just disappear? It just did not make sense. And then they got on horseback and searched the woods for anything that could answer their question. And so when they came in for lunch, again, they were just as mystified, if not more so. This just did not make sense. They warned us they were keeping all of us children inside the house because they didn't know what they were dealing with. So Judy and I had just found things to entertain ourselves with. And fortunately for Judy and me, we could always find something to talk about, always. And again, that night, I was awakened by the sound of wood knocking. And that would be the case every single night that I was there. Sometimes Uncle Jess would be awakened by it. Sometimes he wasn't. And like, who were these people? How could they do that? How could they be so close and leave no sign that they'd been there? Well, my parents came on Sunday. And after supper, by the way, they brought Pete back home too. And they, after supper, we all got in our cars and went back to Dallas County where we lived. And just all talking about this mysterious cattle disappearing. It just did not make sense. Well, that was June. Come July, we go on the second Sunday as usual. And Judy rushes up to me. She's got something else special to share with me. Because the land was sand. Whenever there was an area where the grass was thin or plant life was thin, and the hard rain fell, it would carve another path in the land. But the animals that lived near where that new path was didn't expect to see any humans coming down that path, and we could get closer to them. See bobcats, and foxes, and other animals that lived along that new trail. Oh, it was a thrill. And then we started smelling root beer. That didn't make sense. Root beer in the middle of the woods. And Judy corrected me, said, well, that's sassafras roots. For those who don't know, when the root beer was first made, it was made from the roots of the sassafras trees. And Judy explained the sassafras trees do not have that aroma, just the roots do. So we knew that someone had unearthed some sassafras trees. We just followed the scent out of curiosity. And there was another mystery. It was a pit. A square pit. Who digs a square pit? Someone did. We said it had to have been a squatter. I mean, the corners were right angled square. I mean, it was a square pit. And when they did it, they laid bare some of the sassafras roots to the trees. And that's why it smells so wonderful. The dirt, the clay, there was clay under the sand, and the clay was filled with that aroma. Whoever had dug the pit had also formed a ramp from ground level to the floor of the pit and carved out two chairs out of the clay. What a wonderful place this was. What a wonderful place. Judy and I searched the area for any sign of burnt wood or land where someone had been cooking meals, and we both agreed that whatever squatter it was that had dug this pit must have had one of those camping stoves that my parents had. That was fueled by butane. And so anyway, we went down the pit and sat down on the chairs and enjoyed a long visit. Before we had left, her grandmother had given us sandwiches. She made certain we had pockets because you weren't allowed to throw your trash down in her woods. No, no, no. You had to put the trash in your pockets. And we weren't allowed to take anything to drink. She just told us, drink slow. If you eat slow enough, you won't need to drink anything. And so we sat there and ate our lunch and enjoying that wonderful aroma. And we must have said, this was the perfect place for us to be. There were shrubs all on the whole 4 sides. So we could be close to the ground and look under the shrubs and watch for more animals. Oh, this is wonderful. This was a wonderful place. And speaking of animals, I realized where I was sitting that there was a bobcat's kittens. I knew that mother would be eager to move her kittens away from these humans. So I went to where Judy was and I told her about it. And we agreed we just turned our backs and let her take her kittens away from that area. Then, after we were sure she was finished, we sat back in those clay chairs and visited some more. I honestly don't know how much time we were there. We couldn't see the sky to tell the time by the sun because the trees were so thick. Then I heard footsteps, heavy footsteps. I looked under the shrub and no, it can't be. There's no such thing as monsters. Everyone knows that there's no such thing as monsters. But there was a monster coming. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be real, but it was. It was huge. Huge. It looked like a giant ape walking towards us. I knew we had to have been near one of its food sources, and it had a furious look on its face. I had no idea what it would do to Judy and me when it saw us right there by its food. And I just started praying softly. And the first word out of my mouth was the name of the God I prayed to, Jesus. As soon as I said Jesus, he froze in place. I saw him lift up 2 giant hands and feel of what was some kind of invisible barrier. This was just as amazing as seeing the monster. And then almost immediately, a small group of half-grown coyotes came out of the pasture. And they were scuffling around, playing together, totally unaware of the monster. But the monster could see them. And he started chasing after them, and they ran. And he chased them out of the area, I'm sure after his next meal. Well, now I had to get Judy out of there, but how? I started running. I ran up the ramp, and I said, come on, Judy, we got to go. I'll explain to you when we get to the goat pasture. I said, oh, well, you can go home if you want to. I'm going to stay in this place. It's too wonderful. So I tried another tactic. I go over to the exposed sassafras roots, and I pointed out that some of them were up to 4 inches in diameter, that none of them had been cut. They'd all been twisted until they broke. Judy looked at them with new eyes, and she said, you're scaring me. I told her, I think we need to be scared, and we need to leave right away. And she agreed. And we left. When we got to the safety of the goat pasture, I told her about that monster I had seen out in the woods. She's sitting just a few feet from me and looking into my eyes, and she knows I'm telling her the truth. And I told her, I've got to tell your grandpa and your dad about this. That monster must be what's taking their cattle. It's so tall, it can just step over their fences, and that's why they're not finding any footsteps. I think it's probably strong enough that it could just pick at one of the cows and carry it away. She nodded. So we go inside, and no one's in the kitchen. We find our mothers on the porch sitting on beds visiting. So we asked them where the men were. They didn't know. Meanwhile, I heard Judy's grandmother, Aunt Johnny, come into the kitchen. So we go in there and ask her where the men were. She didn't know. Then Judy said, "Tell Aunt Johnny about the animal you saw in the woods." And Aunt Johnny gets this haunted look, like she already knows what I'm going to say. Even so, I told her about the pit we had found and that monstrous-sized ape that had been walking towards us. She said, "There's no such thing." But her eyes said she knew there was such a thing, and I challenged her. I said, "I can see it in your eyes. I can see you know what that animal is. What is it called?" And she said, "There's no such thing. There's no such thing. They do not exist. They don't exist. And I want you to promise not to tell anybody about it." I said, "I'm not going to promise it. The men of the family need to know about it. That monster must be the one that's taking your husband's cattle, and you know Uncle Jesse needs those cattle. That's how he makes his livelihood. That's the only way he pays the electric bill." And she kept arguing with me while I left in defiance. I was going to find those men. I started going through the windows, and looking back, I wish I had just stepped out of the house and started searching. But while I was looking through the windows trying to spot the men, Aunt Johnny was talking to Judy. And Judy, Grandma, comes rushing up to my arm, crying, and shaking. You've got to go back to the kitchen and promise, Grandma, that you're not going to tell anyone about that monster, or she's going to punish me worse than she's ever punished me before. And I told her, I said, "Your grandpa and your dad need to know about that monster. What if it comes into the yard?" She said, "They need to be prepared for it." She said, please come into the kitchen." And that's when Judy's grandmother told me how she was going to punish Judy if I told anyone. Anytime we would come, she would have to go into the outhouse and wait there throughout our visit, and I would not be allowed to visit with her. I wouldn't get to stay another week like we were used to. And she would try to convince my parents not to bring me along for their visits. That was how she was going to punish Judy and me if I told anyone. And I continued to try to reason with Aunt Johnny. What if it comes into the yard? Your family needs to be prepared for it. They need to be ready, knowing what I mean, you don't know what it can do. You don't know what it might do. You need to keep your grandkids from going out in the woods. You need to act like I can tell you know it's real. I can tell you do. She would not relent. Meanwhile, Judy was just looking sick. She was crying so much. And I finally gave in, sick at heart. And I made that promise. But I kept trying to reason with Aunt Johnny. Kept trying to tell her, what if it comes? What if it's in your home when you come home? You've got to act like that monster is real. She would not reason with it. She would not. Then she grabs a knife out of a drawer. She said, "This is my bone cutting knife. There hasn't been a bone that I haven't been able to cut. Even the thickest cow bone I can cut with this knife. It ought to be good for cutting tree roots." And I told her, "You're not going to that pit, are you?" She said, "I sure am. You told me that there's exposed sassafras roots. My family happens to love to drink sassafras Excuse me, I'm stuttering. I tried to reason with it, could not change her mind. And she marched out and ordered us to stay in the kitchen, that we better be in those same chairs when she came back with some sassafras roots. I don't know how long we waited. Judy and I scooted our chairs close to each other and put our arms around each other to comfort each other as we both cried about our situations. And Johnny did come back with a bucket full of sassafras roots. And she said, there was no monster out there. I said, but you know only a monster could twist those sassafras roots. And every single one of those sassafras roots has been twisted. She grabbed each individual one, chopped off the twisted area, and cut into small pieces first, threw it into a large bowl full of water before she chopped up the rest of the sassafras roots. After she washed them all, she made a large pot of sassafras tea. And normally I would enjoy it, but I couldn't that day. It's just, I was so worried for my family, and I couldn't warn them. I could not warn them. Well, that was July. A month passed. It's August. And even though it's a hot summer day, I knew it would be cool under the trees. Judy comes rushing up to me with another surprise. Another hard rain had come, and they had carved out another new path, which she had not gone down yet. She was saving that first experience for sharing it with me. So off we go down a new trail. This time, we come to another mystery. There's a cabin at the bottom of a gully. What a weird place to put a cabin. This did not make sense. The only thing that Judy and I could think of was that a squatter had built that cabin and down in the gully so it wouldn't be seen. But we both agreed that all the water would flow down into that cabin anytime it rained. There would be nothing to stop it, especially since it was sand. I mean, it just would just wash right off into that gully. And just, what? They don't even have a door. And I said, well, maybe they're not through building it. There was something else about that cabin that bothered me. Then it dawned on me. None of the logs had been cut. They were up to 6 inches in diameter, and none of them had been cut. I was about to turn to Judy and tell her, we've got to leave. And oh no, it's that monster. That monster must have built this log cabin. And then before I turn to see Judy, I see this small grove of trees that have been woven together, even though they were still alive. I didn't want to know the explanation for that one. I knew no human could do that. It had to have been something the monster built. I looked at Judy, and before I could say anything, her face grew pale with terror. And there was a smell. There was this mound of dirt, tall mound of dirt, right beside the gully. And that smell was coming from behind it. It was like some combination of skunk and wet dog. And oh, it was so strong, it made my head hurt and upset my stomach. And then Judy did the last thing you do in the woods. She turned around and squealed, "It's the monkey man! It's the monkey man!" The monkey man? What in the world is a monkey man? I thought. And she's still squealing, "It's the monkey man! It's the monkey man!" And she's running wildly, waving both arms. And I expected that monster to dash out from behind the dirt and grab her. But it didn't. Why didn't it? Isn't that what monsters did? But it did not run after her. She kept running wildly, screaming, and I was in shock myself. My legs felt like lead. I could not run. And strangely, I didn't feel afraid of that monster. For some reason, it just didn't feel scary where I was. I was walking down the path that Judy was running down, and then I saw these two tender eyes looking down at me. I looked up at them. They were looking at me with that same protective look that I'd seen grown women look at me when I was a little girl, like they wanted to take care of me. Then she stepped out of hiding, and she was beautiful. Much taller than my dad, and whiter, covered with chocolate brown hair. The hide on her face and her hands were chocolate brown too. Like I said, her eyes were chocolate brown. Her lips were chocolate brown except for a beige outline that went around her lips. They were ape-like lips, not human-like lips. She had two triangular breasts that were nearly flat. That's why I knew it was a female. I'm assuming that she hasn't nursed a child yet. If she had youngins, surely they'd be near her. So, that's where my thoughts were. I'm having a wonderful time analyzing her, and I could tell she's analyzing me, and that she's still looking at me with a tender look like she knew I was a harmless child. Then she lifts her arm, not like we humans would lift to point at something, but just lifted her arm in a loose way and kind of some casually pointed towards Judy, like she wanted me to help Judy in some way. I nodded my head, and my legs, I realized, had energy in them again. I didn't want to startle her, so I didn't start running immediately. I started off slow and just got a little faster and a little faster. By that time, Judy was at least 500 feet ahead of me. I could not catch her. But I could call to her and try to get her to calm down. So that's what I was doing. There were predators in those woods. They had to hurt her. And we just didn't know. Normally, a coyote wouldn't bother us or any of them. The wolves, the leopard wouldn't bother any of us. But she sounded like a woodland animal, and that would probably stimulate their hunger. But as we were running along, I kept smelling whiffs of her scent, just little whiffs. Not strong enough to give me a headache or upset my stomach. Just enough like she was letting us know she was there. And I'm completely convinced it was her way to let predators know she was also there to protect us. I have no doubt that if one had come rushing up there, that she would have snatched it up and stopped it. Because she cared about our safety. There was no doubt about it. I don't know how many times I smelled that I'll call it an aroma. Yes, it stank, but it said that she was protecting us. Judy didn't think that way. Every time she smelled it, she went into more of a panic. It's getting close. It's getting close. She'd squeal out. But I knew she was protecting us. That's why no predators came after Judy. We finally made it to the goat pasture, and Judy could barely lift her legs. She tried to say something to me, and just a hiss came out of her throat. I knew she didn't have enough energy to climb through the barbed wire fence, and that was their rule. Someone in the past had opened the gate and left it open and let out all their livestock. And Uncle Jess and his family tried to get them back, but they couldn't. Most of them were lost in the woods, never to come back. and he had to get a job so he could start up his herd all over again. So they had that strong rule: you did not open that gate. But I lifted the gate, and when I did, the chain made a noise, and so did the hinges of the gate. And Aunt Johnny came rushing out to rebuke us. But she saw Judy, and as soon as Judy got through, I closed the gate, and I was about to go to the fence when she ordered me to go to the fence, when it was obvious I was about to do it anyway. I forgave her. I knew Judy needed her help. She had her arm around Judy, and she walked her to the house. As soon as I was through with the fence, I ran up to the house. When I walked into the living room, all the adults were there. Both my parents, both of Judy's parents, both of her grandparents, and Uncle Chalk were all there, and they were all staring at me. And someone asked, "What happened to Judy?" So I told her about what had happened in the woods. Then Uncle Jess asked me, "Have you seen—" Oh, all of them, like an echo. Said, "It's the monkey man. The monkey man is back." They were saying back, like he'd been there before. "It's the monkey man. The monkey man is back." Then Uncle Jess asked me, "Have you seen one before?" That's when I realized that Aunt Johnny was crying and shaking. I asked her if I could break my promise to her, and she nodded her head. Then I told him about the pit and the male monkey man I'd seen before. Then I started shaking, and Uncle Jess said, "Why?" And I said, "Uncle Jess, it's so big. If you shoot it one time, it won't kill it." And Aunt Johnny nodded her head. I said, "It'll keep coming. It'll either hurt you real bad, it might even kill you. I don't want that to happen to my family." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "We'll get our neighbors. You'll see them. They'll all be lined up in our backyard come sunset. And we'll have a big hunting party that will go after those monsters." And he looked Johnny in both eyes as he touched both her knees and said, "I promise we won't do it alone." Then Lewis asked my dad to stand up and asked me how tall was that male monkey man compared to my dad. I said, "Taller." And so he started raising his hand in increments until I said, "That's it." And they all agreed that was 7 foot tall. Then Lewis asked me how tall the monkey man was compared to my dad. And I said, "Well, he's taller than my dad." So he stood next to my dad. And we started using hand increments to decide how wide he was. And we all agreed 4 foot wide. And we did the same thing for the female. And we agreed she was 7 foot tall by 3 foot wide. And then Uncle Jess asked me a question I did not want to answer. Could it have been one of the monkey men that you saw that night in the cattle pasture? I hated to say it. She had protected us. I said, it was the female. And Uncle Jess said, "I know she protected you. I know she did. I want to remind you that sometimes wild animals do that. But the same wild animal that protects you one time can turn against you another time. And that wild animal is taking my cattle. That's my livelihood." And I said, "I know, Uncle Jess. I know you have to kill her. I just have to be sad about it." Then Uncle Jess came up with a plan. The men of his family would start at one particular landmark, and Uncle Jess would go in one direction, Uncle Chalk would go in another, and Luce would go in another, and they would go tell their neighbors a short story. And he told all the men, both men, to take their guns and extra bullets with them, just in case the monkey men were at the house when they came back. They agreed and left. Then he told my dad to get the rifle and sit on the front steps with a box of bullets. Then he told his wife, who was an excellent hunter, to sit on the back stoop with her favorite shotgun with a box of shells, which she did. She actually grabbed 2. And she told Lenny to stay in the yard and call the boys home. And thankfully, they weren't far, so they came home very quickly. And she told them just to keep them in the yard. And they played a ball game in the yard while we stayed in the house. Judy was still depleted. Her mother had put some kind of salve on her chest and her back and had been rubbing it and giving her something hot to drink. But she needed to lie down for a nap. And Lenny led her to her bed and turned an electric fan on her. And I asked if I could talk to her, and Lenny explained, well, she's about to fall asleep. And I said, well, I like to try to keep her from having nightmares. She agreed. So I went and I explained to her that female monkey man wasn't trying to hurt her. She was protecting us. And as I explained it all to her, she agreed, and she was grateful. And when she woke up, she thanked me because she did not have any nightmares. Just as they had planned, about 5 o'clock that evening, a large group of men arrived. Some came on horseback. Some drove pickups with trailers with horses in them. All brought long guns with them. Some shotguns, some rifles. And when I looked out the window just to see what the look on their faces was as Uncle Jess told them about what he knew about the monkey men. They were all stuffing their pockets, all their pockets, with either bullets or shotgun shells. Their front shirt pockets, all 4 of their pants pockets, including their back pockets, were stuffed with extra bullets and shotgun shells. And my stepmother rebuked me and said, "Get away from that window. You don't need to be curious." And I looked over at Aunt Johnny and I said, "I just want to make certain there weren't any scaredy cats among them." I said, "You should see their faces, Aunt Johnny. You know they're not afraid." So she rushed up to the window and she recognized their faces. She was the local Avon seller, and she also sold Tupperware to all her neighbors, so she knew all their wives, and she had seen their husbands there as well. And she was calling them by name, and like they usually had at least 3 generations, sometimes 4, living in the same house. So you see 3 or 4 men from the family. There was close to 20 men in all ganged up there. And we had to leave because of the time of day. It was just getting too late. The road was unlit and very narrow. And so it's actually dangerous to drive through there after dark. And so we got into the road before it got dark, or we had to get in the car before it got dark and go down the road. And we get home, we're all still thinking about it, feeling worried for our family, having no way to communicate with them. They didn't have telephones. If you sent them a letter, it would take over a week to get to them, and then a reply would take more than a week to get back to us. So actually, the fastest way to visit with them is to talk to them, would be to visit with them. And oh, by the way, before we left, my dad told Aunt Johnny that even though we usually came on Sundays, the second Sunday of the month, he'd like to come back the next Saturday in case they were still hunting the monkey man. And she said, please, thank you. So Dad already had all of his guns sitting on the table, the kitchen table. And he was cleaning one of them, cleaning and oiling one of them. And I went to bed and I just couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that female monkey man. I had to talk about her. She had saved our life. I know she had kept us safe. I know she had. So I just go in there and I tell him even more about what I experienced with her, which my dad appreciated. And I said, can they just scare them away? And he said, when an animal is that large, you can't scare it away. There's nothing you can do that will scare it away. They just have to kill them, honey. He said, I know you don't feel good about it, especially about that female that helped you. But she's eating their cattle too. So that's why they're justified in killing her. And I agreed. I didn't feel good about agreeing, but I understood. The next Saturday, we go there, and by that time, Dad has cleaned and recleaned and recleaned each one of his guns and oiled them, and got a stock of shells for all of them. And he's just had them all packed in the back trunk. And my stepmother got worried and said, if we have to stop for a flat tire and you open that gate, people will call the police on us. So she got one of her quilts to cover them. So in case he had to open his trunk. And about an hour later, we're on the land again. As soon as the dogs barked our arrival, all the family came rushing out with big smiles on their faces. They were safe. They were safe. What a wonderful relief it was that they were all safe. We go inside and Uncle Jess explains to all of us that they did not spot either animal the first night. But the next night, they went on a hunting trip again. And that night, they killed a female. And that they had learned already that when one of the monkey men die, you leave the body alone. And he told him about a former neighbor that happened when he was a little boy. So he would have been he said he was about 12 at the time, which would have been about 1900 or so. And one of their neighbors had also killed a female monkey man out in the woods. And he got his wagon as close as he could and dragged the body and put it on the wagon, showed it to his family, and drove his horse-drawn wagon to some of his neighbors and showed them the female monkey man, and left it in the wagon with the intention of showing it to even more neighbors the next day. That night, they were awakened by a monster trying to get into their house. The male was there, literally trying to tear apart their house. They all grabbed their guns, and they were all excellent shots. And they kept shooting the animal and shooting the animal and shooting the animal. And he kept coming. Finally, he was so wounded, he gave up. And he left, leaving the blood trail out of the yard. They spent a sleepless night waiting for sunset. When they went outside, they found out that all of their livestock had either been maimed or killed. That was their horses, their cattle, their goats, and their pigs. And their chickens had been stomped into the ground. All because he had handled that dead monkey man. And they told me about that story, and that's what Aunt Johnny was thinking about. I spoke about it, so that's what Aunt Johnny was thinking about when she made me promise not to tell you about it. He nodded his head. And anyway, he went ahead and said that after they killed a female and left her body there, they did destroy the nest. They had all brought chainsaws to do so, and while some men kept watch with their guns ready, they cut up the log cabin and the trees that were woven together. The next time we came, they had placed gun racks that they had made in every single room in case he did return. And every room on the wall high enough that the children couldn't reach them. And a place for the bullets as well, high up on the wall. Every room. And Aunt Johnny walked with her shotgun everywhere she went. As she was making beds in the house, she'd have that shotgun with her at all times. Hanging clothes on the line, she had a shotgun with her. Going to the outhouse, she carried a shotgun with her. As long as they lived there, she carried that shotgun everywhere with her. And so she told me that her neighbors were living the same way. All the women were keeping shotguns with them at all times. And anytime the men went into the pasture or the woods, they carried a gun with them. And so that area stayed on high alert for several years. We weren't allowed to go into the woods in September or October because of that threat. But come November, when we arrived, Uncle Jess said he thought it was safe for the kids. He was letting his kids go into the woods then. And Judy's parents took her and her siblings to someplace. And so I didn't have anybody to spend time with. Fortunately for me, I brought a book. And I decided to go look at the area where we had seen both animals. The pit, the square pit, had been completely filled with cut logs. The gully, or what I thought was a gully, it turns out it had been dug by the monkey men, and that's why that mound of dirt was where it was. My family members had used shovels. They didn't have anything else but shovels to use it. They hand shoveled that clay back into the hole. They were that determined to eradicate any sign those animals had been there. I went to the meadow, to the same log I had sat on before with Judy, and felt safe. All around me, the woodlands and grasses and shrubs were taking on their fall colors, and it was peaceful, so peaceful. I walked a little further and found a place to read a book, and I just sat there and read a book and enjoyed the peaceful area. The threat was gone. It would never come back. I would continue to go there into the mid-70s, and the monkey men never came back. This is where my story ends.
Anna, that is an incredible account.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I definitely do. I'm still trying to. It's a lot. That's a lot to take in from that story. It is. How did that affect you for the rest of your life as you grew up?
Well, I knew they were real. Living in a world that didn't believe they existed, except for my family, and the people in that area. And when there was that famous film of the female Bigfoot,
right?
walking, yeah, I knew that was real. It looks amazingly like the one I had seen out in the woods. Even walk like she did. And he did. I mean, they walk very much like humans do. And I do have this insight. I know some people believe in portals, and I happen to be one of those that also does. But there's also an explanation in the natural. While you form questions, I'll go ahead and share something else. After I was grown and married, my husband lived in another rural part of Texas. And there was a local coyote that loved to frustrate my neighbors, two Irish settlers. He would walk about 90 feet onto the ground, hike his leg and leave a scent, walk a little further, hike his leg and leave a scent, and keep doing this for close to 90 feet until you wondered how big was his bladder. Then he would jump up on a rock and leap about at least 8 feet in another direction and run off in another direction. Those two dogs would find his scent and follow it up to the rock and think he had disappeared. Well, I saw two of those animals. They have powerful thigh muscles. I'm sure they could jump quite a distance. So I think one of the ways, since they do not want to be found, and they keep proving to we human beings that they don't want to be found. I think a very common tactic of them is for them as they're walking along that they just jump out of the area and start walking a different direction. That's one of my explanations for a common phenomenon. I can tell you the male reminded me of a chimpanzee face. In fact, that it was bi-colored. His face, the hide on his face was tan, and his fur was black, like a chimpanzee's is. But of course, he was bigger, much bigger. He looked more gorilla-like than a chimpanzee. But that was what I thought of at first was how chimpanzee he looked because he was bi-colored. The palms of his hands were that beige color, and part of his chest was also beige. I could see it through his dark fur. And the female, her features were softer. I mean, she still looked like a monster, okay? If she growled at you, you would think she was a monster. If she growled, if you stood between her and a youngin', you know she was a monster. But seeing her in that light of day, with that protective look on her face and tender eyes, I thought she was beautiful. She was, again, also very ape-like, but her head was smaller, more rounded. His had that sort of rectangular top like a gorilla, but hers was more rounded. And I had a feeling she could just look at him with those soft brown eyes and get anything she wanted. But anyway, that's my guess.
Do you remember any really striking differences or similarities between the female monkey man and when you saw the video of Patty or the Patterson-Gimlin film?
Well, yeah, they look different. Now, I was seeing that when I saw it, it was in black and white TV. And so, of course, it was all shades of gray and black. She was walking with her knees bent more. The male walked more human-like. His hip joints and knee joints and ankle joints were very similar to humans in the way we walk. I could not imagine. Now, he might squat down if he was trying to avoid high branches. He probably did. That may have been what she was doing. When he started taking that picture, she may have come from underneath the trees, and that may have been why she was bending her knees. She'd been bending them to avoid tree branches. That would explain that, but I didn't see her stand completely upright. But I did him, and I did the female that the month later. I could never imagine any three of them getting on all fours, unless it was to get something off the ground, but not to crawl across the ground. They just weren't built for that. It would have been awkward if they tried it. And their fur fell back into place very neatly. Like a fox. If you ever see a fox in the wild, it's like no matter what they run through, they always look neat. Well, that was the same with their fur or hair, whatever you call it. It felt more like hair as they were moving about. So I don't know how it's different from other animals, but they looked neatly kept.
There's some phrasing that I want to clarify during your story, just to make sure I'm understanding it. So during the hunt, are you saying that the men that were out there urinated around the Monkey Man's area?
No, I didn't use that word. You used it.
Well, I know,
but all the audience probably guessed what we were talking about. Yeah,
I want to make sure that's not.
They did that to leave their scent.
Yeah.
They definitely did it to leave their scent, because they did not want those animals to return.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I just wanted to clarify it. So,
that's why they did that, just to scare them away.
Sure, it's like an established dominance type thing. I totally get it.
And I didn't share this before, but Uncle Jess, during that visit after they killed him, one of them explained that several neighbors had already been missing their pets or livestock. I'm sorry, some it was cattle, some it was goats, and so and I think one pig had been missing as well, and they were trying to make certain they never came back. And no one ever reported them coming back. No one did. So it had worked.
Which it's incredible. Just to remind, so this happened in the 60s. So we are talking about 60 years. Current time is 2025. So this whole area has grown up. You said this whole county area is totally different.
Totally different. You will not find the deep woods in Zandt County again. They just don't exist. Society is completely taken over. We already in the 1970s saw signs of houses being built in that area.
Does this same family own the property still, or are they long gone off of that property?
I don't know.
Okay.
Most of them have been dead for several years.
Gotcha.
And as far as I know, they sold the land because none of my cousins continued to live there. So as far as I know, the land was sold. I never discussed it with them. Any visits afterwards. So I don't know what happened to it.
So I guess just to maybe ask that a different way too, but I think you just answered it. But did you ever, when you were older, did you ever have a conversation about this with any of the individuals involved when you were in a later time in life?
My parents. I talked with my parents, especially my dad. That's why it stayed in my memory as well as it did. Because he enjoyed hearing a long story. That was especially a true one. And so he let me tell this same account I shared with you several times. And often we would just be alone. We were the only two people in two households of families, me with my husband and children, he with his wife and children, that got up before daylight. And we would visit or as soon as the light was bright enough that I could make certain I didn't step on any snakes. That was his concern about me coming earlier. I'd go to his house and we would talk about animals a lot. And so, yeah, that's why I stay. I mean, when you don't have anybody else, our society, I never heard anybody else talk about that kind of animal. And when that movie was, or that film was on TV, people made fun of it in public. I'd hear them. You could tell it was somebody in a costume and hear that sort of talk. So I knew if I brought it up, I'd be made fun of too. I mean, what good would it do to bring it up? It wasn't until modern times that I found a community of believers. And now almost anybody believes in monkey man, or Bigfoot, I'm sorry. I was at, here in the small town I live in called Wolf City. We have a writers meeting, and I'm not a published writer, but two of the people there that come there are. And I just come to hear them talk, basically. Well, what did we talk about this last Saturday? Bigfoot. That subject, I wasn't the one that even brought it up. One of our other members brought it up. And then we realized that one of our other members was wearing a shirt with Bigfoot on it. And so one of my friends asked me to tell my Bigfoot story. And so I told him what I told all of you, my Bigfoot story. Now it's a different world, if people don't believe it, they just don't bring it up anymore.
Exactly. There's a part of your account that I found really interesting is the Bigfoot was not able to move, or the monkey man, sorry, was not able to move after you said the name of Jesus, which is incredibly interesting. First off, why do you think that that affected that creature in that way?
Well, I think he probably forgot all about it. He was just momentarily, he just had that look on his face, like it's just not important to stay here. He wanted to chase after his next meal, and those half-grown coyotes provided that for him. So I doubt that he even considered it again. He may have. I'm convinced that was God's intervention. I know some of your listeners may not believe that sort of thing, but I'm alive and well. Something kept me safe from that angry animal. And an angry animal, even if it's not trying to hurt somebody, it can accidentally hurt somebody. As small as we were, it could have easily have hurt us, even if it wasn't trying to. It could have just been raving and moving its arms around wildly and knocked one of us who knows how many feet. But it didn't happen because I said that name, Jesus. That was the first time I'd ever done that. I never forgot that lesson, and I've used it in other situations that I wanted his protection.
Absolutely. How long did it take until the Bigfoot or monkey man could start moving again after you used the name of Jesus?
Almost instantly. He wasn't paralyzed. He just couldn't come forward.
Oh, he was kind of like stunned.
He bumped into. I saw him bump into something invisible.
Oh, wow.
He just bumped. I saw his face mash against it, and so he bumped against it like that, and pulled back and touched it with both his hands. And then those coyotes came out of the tall grass on the meadow and provided his next meal. And so my guess is that he never thought about it again. Now, he may have and just came through there carefully and discovered it wasn't there, and okay, it's gone, and just kept walking along. Yeah, that's my guess.
Almost like he had run into a shield or something, some invisible wall. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
A few more questions here, if that's all right. Do you know if any of the men involved ever shared their story publicly from their viewpoint?
I never heard about it. It could have happened, especially if they were drinking something alcoholic. That often loosens men's tongues. But I never heard about it. I didn't never visit with any of their neighbors. I never got to know them. Our only purpose for going down there was to visit with our relatives. So I don't know.
Now, the next question you can definitely decline. I'm gonna ask it just because I try to take this seriously. I do take it seriously, absolutely 100%. But I know this might be a little over the line. But did this happen near a certain town? It would be really interesting to know if encounters have happened in this same area since that point. And if you don't feel comfortable answering that, that's no problem.
Well, if people search for the area, they would not find it. And remember, this is a large animal that has to eat large animals to fill its stomach.
Right.
Something like deer. And so it's not going to be where you can easily find it. And they've proven that they want to be elusive. They don't want to be found. And so my guess is just from that observation that they're going to be where people usually don't go. Now, one of my friends that was at the writers' meeting last Saturday said that she came across someone that had gotten his permission to camp on his ground. He owns several acres in a rural area. I forget how many acres he has, but it's a large area. And according to that man, he saw a large hairy figure, and that's what brought up the subject. And he said it was about 8 foot tall, and that would have been about 30 minutes from where I live. But you wouldn't find it in town. You're not going to find it at the local dollar store. You're going to find it where it's hard for people to go to because they don't want to be found.
Absolutely.
Just like with just like with that man, that animal came upon the fireplace or fire. He was building, had a nice little fire going. That was probably what attracted the animal. He may have been just curious because he didn't do anything more than look at the fire and leave. According to, and I didn't bring this up, during my conversation with Uncle Jess, he brought up the fact that his own dad had been one of the first white men to settle in that particular area. And this was the late 1800s, shortly after the Civil War. And he was warned. He was already knew the Cherokee language, some of it when he came there from other encounters with Cherokee, and there were Cherokee Indians that settled in that area, and they warned him, the first ones to warn him, never touch a fallen Bigfoot, even if you're the one that killed it. Don't skin it. By all means, don't skin it. If you touch that animal, they will be able to smell your scent on it, and they will hunt you and attack your village. That was their warning. They had dealt with them all those years, and they said, never, never touch a dead body. And I think we need to take that seriously. If you happen to find a dead Bigfoot in the woods, don't try to carry it off. Don't try to do that on your own. Please take that warning seriously. They're wild animals. And wild animals have their rules. Whether they agree with your rules or not, they have their own rules. And those wild animals say, do not touch our dead. Only they touch the dead. That's their belief. They touch the dead, they find a place to bury their bodies where you can't find them. And other than that, I said, if you go hunting for Bigfoot, carry a large bag of apples with you. As I've heard from one source, they love that treat. You might be able to lure them with apples. I don't know. As for me, I'm not going to give it a try. No way. I have seen them angry. I know how angry they can be, and I don't want to take that risk myself. But for those that want to hunt for them, use wisdom. By all means, carry a GPS tracker and tell your family where you're going. Or if you don't have family, tell people that know you and care about you where you're going. And keep that GPS tracker on you, because you're going to be traveling in some very wild country, and if you start chasing an animal like that, you won't be noticing landmarks and you could easily get lost. But I also know they have their gentle side, and I've heard more than one story of them rescuing humans. And I believe it because I had that experience myself. I know that she protected us. Oh, and something else that the Indians told my great-grandfather, that these animals were transitory. That is, they traveled a lot. And we know through studies, when they put radar or radio collars on cougars, they have territories that are about 200 miles wide. And an animal that large would probably have an even larger territory. That would explain why my neighbor had one that, or my friend had one that was sighted on his land. He may not ever be seen again. He may have just been passing through. He may have not had a nest there at all. He may have just been passing through to another location looking for big game to feed on.
It's such a fascinating. This is, man. I will be thinking about this for years. But first off, thank you for sharing what you experienced. I do want to also mention before we go, it's very interesting that you're now in the Wolf City area, and it sounds like you're starting to pick this up. But that area has quite the history of Bigfoot sightings, but also dogman encounters as well. So I would say keep your eyes open. And I mean, if you start, it sounds like you're already talking to people about it, but yeah, if you start talking to people in that area of Wolf City, you're going to hear some stories from over the years. I've picked some up just through email, and it's some really wild stuff in that area. So just definitely keep an eye out.
Oh my goodness. I haven't searched your videos. Do you have any videos about Wolf City?
I don't. Not in the, I mean, maybe after this I will, though. If people are listening and they have accounts from Wolf City they would like to share, you could definitely reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. But, you know, so far I don't yet, but that could change. So.
It could. Yeah, it's classified by the state of Texas as a rural community, even though we do have paved roads and we do have a few little stores here. Yeah, but I stay in among people. I'm not going to go hunting for that animal.
Absolutely. The last question that I'd like to ask you, do you keep in touch with Judy at all, or has it been a while since you guys have last talked?
Judy doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Yes, she's still alive, but she does not want to talk about it, so I leave it alone. Yeah. So I don't know what I mean, we had a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
That summer. I mean, she had a terrifying experience because she didn't know that animal was trying to protect her. She thought she was being pursued by that animal, and until I talked to her about it. So, okay, I just don't talk to her about it. If she ever brings up the subject, I will. But she just gets a threatened look in her eyes, and I don't push the topic. And I understand, this was such a high emotional time that summer. Wow, it must have been like that for them. We were only going there once a month.
Mm.
They were having to live there every day, listening to that wood knocking at night, animals disappearing, and hearing them talk about it all the time. And there she was having to keep the secret. I know that had an effect on her emotions, but I don't know what. I know it wasn't a good thing.
You're handling it the right way, where if she does ever want to talk, you're available, but you also are respecting that, how she feels about that right now as well. Anna, it has been such a privilege to talk to you. I mean, this is one of the most intense encounters I've heard since I started this in 2019. But just thank you so much for coming on the show. If you ever need to reach out, or feel free to do so if there's anything I can ever help with. But just thank you for coming on and chatting today, Anna. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, I tell you what, if I do talk to someone in Wolf City that has one of those encounters they want to share, I'll give them your contact information.
Yeah, I appreciate that, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following, or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.